health, psychology, and human nature with André Sturesson. Hey there, friend. Yup. Yes, talking to you. Would you please follow me on Instagram or Facebook? The account name is Health, Psychology, and Human Nature. Welcome to Health, Psychology, and Human Nature with André Sturesson, a science-focused podcast where we explore, learn, and improve our lives together. What is physical intelligence? That is something that we learn in this episode. And sometimes you really need to do it to know it. Everything we do, from changing a light bulb to navigating unknown terrain, relies on physical intelligence, our oldest and most important form of cognition, according to Professor Scott Grafton. To learn more, check out Scott's book, Physical Intelligence, The Science of Thinking Without Thinking. Scott Grafton, he's a distinguished professor at UC Santa Barbara and the director of the UCSB Imaging Center. He's interested in how people organize movement into goal-oriented action and interested in physical intelligence. Friends, please enjoy. Scott.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good evening. It's evening over here. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm happy to be here, and hopefully I can contribute to this.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. So really big thank you for taking your time.
Oh, glad to do it.
I've heard you've been trying out some Swedish words.
Oh, no. I got stuck on tack.
That's good.
We better stop there. Yeah.
I think that was good enough. It's tack. That's thank you.
Tack. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Great. I've heard. So we're going to talk about your book, Physical Intelligence: The Science of Thinking Without Thinking, today. And in the book, you've been describing that you've been out in nature quite a while. So I think it would be interesting to start off by just asking you what is it that you find interesting with going into nature?
Well, for me, it's primarily the wilderness and places that are very wild and unpredictable and where there are no human reference points. Those are the places that I'm drawn to the most, and that's where you get to do the most problem solving, and I think you're challenged the most to keep it all together, right? The stakes are high when you're alone and it's wild.
Yeah.
And it's exciting and feels the best when I'm in those environments.
Well, so it's a couple of different things. It's both that you're working on problems with problem solving, but you also like to just be out where there's not a lot of other human beings and it's a little bit more wild.
That's right. And for the purposes of this book, each year I try to go on a trip alone into the wilderness. And when you do, very few people actually have ever even taken a walk alone, for example, in the woods. And when you do that, you suddenly realize how high the stakes all are, right? You could get lost, you could get injured, a tree could fall on you. I've actually had a friend have a tree fall on her. And everything changes, right? When you're alone, you suddenly are very aware of your environment, and your vigilance and your understanding of what's going on around you changes dramatically. And there's something nice about that. It's primordial. Clearly this is something built into being human that we typically don't exercise very much.
That's true, and especially really going out to the wilderness. I think a lot of us have like never been out to places that, yeah, like when we are almost all alone, like when we don't have any, reception for our phones, and really being out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No phones. Yeah. There's zero access to the phones, and there's no G. Well, you could use satellite phones and things like that, but that just takes. Actually, that confuses things. This is a common problem in the U.S. now. People will buy very sophisticated satellite GPS tracking systems so that, if anything goes wrong with them in the wilderness, they can just push a button and think that someone's going to come rescue them. There's two problems with that. One is no one actually will come and get you. The range,
really? Wow.
Well, it's the chances are low, right? Because, well, certainly the national parks don't have enough resources to go running around collecting everyone who might want their help. And the other is it just changes the psychology of what you're doing, right? You're suddenly not taking complete responsibility. You've got this presumed escape hatch. So people will take higher risks. They'll be less aware of what they're doing.
Right, yeah.
And it can really work against you if you think you can be rescued. If you know there's no one out there to come and get you, it's a very different psychology. You're far more aware and vigilant of what you're doing.
That's true. So what happened with your friend who got stuck under a tree?
Well, she's actually she's a pretty famous mountain climber. She's on the first women's expedition to Annapurna. She's out Nordic skiing with her husband, and he's about a half a mile ahead. The tree just fell on her.
Wow.
And completely buried her in the snow. And he kept skiing on.
Wow.
Having no idea. She just disappeared, right?
Yeah.
He had no idea where she was. And it took her about 45 minutes to dig herself out of a hole.
Yeah.
Right? So she's really buried. So, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah. But it's quite it can really happen to everybody. My cousin's husband, they were just out picking berries, and they became lost in the woods. Just I think it was like 5 minutes away from their home because living in the wood, and they were out there, and they were in a place that they have never been before, and they were just tracking, these berries, and they just got so focused of the actual task, so they just lost track of where they were, and then they couldn't really localize where they were, and then they had to walk around for I think it was like 40 minutes or something, because it took
One of the things I explore in the book is that one of my favorite navigation papers. It was done in Germany, and they asked a very simple question. They said, if it's a overcast day, so there's no references of the sun, and you're in the woods and the terrain is relatively flat. So they did this in, I think, the Black Forest in Germany. Can you walk in a straight line? So they just take people, volunteers, they put a GPS tracker on them, and they say, just walk in a straight line as far as you can. And within just a few kilometers, they're starting to walk in circles.
Really?
Yeah, it's every single person starts, and some people are right-hand turn walkers, and some are left-hand turn circles. But and so you can see it's impossible, almost impossible, to keep a reference frame in your mind without the sun or some kind of other external reference, compass. It's very, very hard. And they repeated the study in the Sahara Desert at night. I think it was an overcast night, so there's no stars to guide them. And they should just walk in a straight line in the desert. Same thing. Started walking in a circle after about a kilometer or two. So yeah, it's really easy without clear external references to get lost like that. And the woods make it really, really hard, right?
Yeah, for sure. we could get into to the book a little bit, and I mean the title really gives away what it's all about, which is great. So I think that we would start off by just asking you what physical intelligence is, if we can just really get into that. So what is physical intelligence?
It's all the aspects of the mind and body that enable us to do things and interact with our world. And when I started this book, I was thinking about it as sort of all the intelligence that doesn't get studied, at least in academia. My own work kind of sat between two fields. One was the science of motor control and how the body moves. Right. There's lots of labs that do absolutely beautiful work on how the spinal cord drives the muscles, how the muscles move us through space. And there's very little brain involved in that. And then the other kind of science I was involved in was cognitive neuroscience, which is the study of the mind, the human mind in particular, and how we think, understand the world. And that's essentially a brain in a jar with no body. Right. And so you've got one field that's all body and one field that's all brain and mind. And there's no mind-body connection there, right? And so how do we bring these two academic fields together and think about this really interesting sweet spot in the middle, which is all the capacities that it takes to just do the simplest of things, walk down a icy covered sidewalk, climb up a ladder, repair something in the house, learn to do things, run fast through the forest. The stuff, basically activities we do and completely take for granted. We just sort of think they're, well, for good reason. Much of physical intelligence is under the hood, right? It's capacities we really don't want to have to consciously pay attention to, that we can just execute. And that creates a problem for the scientists or for all of us, because it is so easy to walk efficiently that we just don't worry about it, right? Well, I'll just go walk, forgetting that it takes probably, a huge amount of your brain and your resources are just used for simple activities like that. So the book goes through a lot of keeps going at this question of what capacities does it really take to just execute and complete actions in the world, just through a lot of different lenses.
Right. I think that point you just made is really important. I think probably to understand about movement. That, I mean, there's a lot of things that are conscious. I mean, when we are thinking, when we are perhaps solving a math problem, we can be quite conscious about, like we were experiencing something or we're seeing something, but when we are, I mean, we can really be walking around talking with a friend and not paying attention or not thinking at all about the actual walking part. And it's like this physical part is really something that can be very much automated, at least in everyday life.
And that's right. And it's constantly being tuned. So if you're walking with a friend, having a nice conversation, there's all kinds of interesting things that are going on, right? For one, you're not walking into trees.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'd say, well, why not? All right. What is it in the brain that allows you to, plan trajectories through space so that you fit into the environment in a very smooth, efficient way? Another thing that goes on is you're adjusting the quality of your movement all the time. So as soon as you pick up a bag of groceries while you're walking, that changes your center of gravity, total load on your body. Your step and stride length will immediately adjust so that you're now adopting the most efficient movement, right, with that grocery bag. So you're burning the fewest possible calories, as this change is taking place, and it happens really fast, right? If you put someone on a treadmill that's going at a particular speed, within 2 steps, they will have adopted a stride length and cadence that's maximally efficient, right? So your body just knows how to be maximally efficient under just a huge range of conditions, with the grocery bag, without the grocery bag, in a hurry, not in a hurry, whatever it is, it's constantly tuning performance. So all that's going on as you're having your nice little conversation with a friend.
Yeah, it's fascinating to just think about like all the different, programs or whatever you want to call it, that is like automatically just working without us having to think about it at all.
Yes, and if you think, can we actually dive in deep and have really good access to any of this stuff consciously? And the answer is, by and large, no. A good way to think about it is, look, if my conscious mind could have control of my brainstem, where all the nuclei are that control heart rate and blood pressure and things like that, that would be problematic. I could kill myself just by poking around in there.
True.
So that we create these, by design, there are these beautiful firewalls where we can kind of reach in some places, but many of them we really prevent access.
Right. Have you heard anything about people who have learned about how to manipulate these systems that we've thought of to be really autonomous? Or
yeah, I think it's some of these things you can have access to, and this is a hot area of neuroscience right now that my lab's involved in a little bit. If you go and you take a textbook about the autonomic nervous system, so this is the part of the nervous system that controls blood pressure, how much blood is rushing through your skin, which is going to really influence your temperature regulation, heart rate, things like that. All the textbooks show that it's regulated through reflex circuits that go up into your brainstem, the base of the brain.
Yeah.
And there's no input from the cortex, right? From the main CPUs that we use for thinking and planning and acting.
Yeah.
So there's this gap in knowledge because we know, Shakespeare's, pointed out quite clearly that you see an attractive person and your heart rate skips a beat, right? It speeds up.
Yeah.
Right. Almost immediately. Like so there has to be cognition is always involved in this system that we use to regulate the body and to sustain the body. So we're all trying to figure out how that's done. And one of the most exciting pieces of work that's come out for me is work by Peter Strick. He's an investigator at Pittsburgh University. And he uses viral tracing studies where he can track how the nerves that go to the end organs, like the heart or the adrenals, which are used for stress responses, he can back trace those neurons all the way up through multiple junction points to where they originate, all the way at the level of cortex. So past the brainstem, all the way up to the cortex. And there it is. You can see what parts of the brain are actually influencing these systems. And it's neat. It's the motor areas. Not surprisingly, right? If I'm going to go stand up and walk across the house, I need to get my heart rate going while I'm standing up. I don't want to walk for a while and then have a delay in that. I want to prospectively anticipate
Yeah.
what the requirements are going to be. The other areas that seem to be really important are areas involved in mood, not surprisingly, right? Your moods and sort of how you're thinking about yourself, those really influence your body physiology. And the other areas that seem to be really important are decision-making areas, particularly those that are involved in where let's say you're choosing amongst two conflicting offers that each have, some reward and some costs to them, and you're adjudicating and making up your mind. These systems seem to be really involved there as well. And now we're doing studies where we make people make choices, difficult choices. We measure how their heart is how hard their heart is beating, not how fast it's beating, how hard it's beating.
Yeah.
And offer by offer, we can see dynamics in the heart change with these cognitive tasks.
That's very interesting, and also very interesting what you just said about that we have to anticipate the demands of our body before we do stuff. So that we have so that our blood pressure increase just in the right time when we are standing up and start walking. That's fascinating.
There's two amazing studies. One is by Anne Graybiel at MIT, where she has monkeys who are making decisions they basically are given an offer of some juice, and but they have to decide whether they'll take a puff of air to the eye, which is very irritating to them.
Okay.
And so would you take this much juice for this long of a puff, right? So there's a trade-off in each, and they figure out sort of what the monkey's decision space is like what's the line? There's some offers they like, some offers they don't, and some in between. And they can stimulate one of these deep decision-making areas and turn it on, or they can anesthetize it with temporary medications. And you can make a monkey really pessimistic, like no offer's good enough. Right? And we've all been in those kind of moods before, right? Today's one of those days where the cup is half empty. There's nothing good enough for me. And other days where we're really optimistic.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is the brain area they're studying is also the area that's projecting to the body, right? That's really determining how hard your heart's beating, blood pressure control. That same brain area in epileptic patients, if you stimulate that area in epileptic patients, you can radically drop blood pressure in those patients to a scary level. You'd be like, you better turn that stimulator off or they're going to pass out. So it's all intertwined, right? This idea of mind at the level of just making ordinary decisions and your attitudes about those decisions, and how your body is both anticipating that choice and reacting to it. They're all tightly interconnected.
That's really fascinating. And before you mentioned, you talked about the mind-body connection linked to physical intelligence. So I thought if we could spend a little time there. So if you could explain the mind part and the body part of the mind-body connection, and then also link it to physical intelligence, that would be interesting.
That's a hard question. Well, mind's a lot of things, right? I think if you think about mind, body, and physical intelligence, where it all comes together, I think the last chapter of the book sort of captures this. The place where it's easy to see all these relationships sort of pushing and pulling each other is in situations where you're really fatigued and you have to keep going.
Yeah.
And everyone should experience this at some point. It's fascinating, right? Because on the one hand, you can think of a situation where you've decided to take a walk across the city, and it's it's a big walk, and you suddenly realize you've got to get all the way back across, and the trains have stopped running, and it's too late for the buses and whatever. You just have to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so you can see right there, you've already made the decision. So there's been a lot of conscious thought into what your goals were for the day. And now you're going to head back, and you're going to own your decision, and you're going to do it. That's fine. Now let's say it starts to snow and it gets really miserable out. You have all these mental resources to keep pushing on. And it's fascinating. There are areas of the brain where if you stimulate them, patients will say, oh, I felt like I was in a snowstorm and I had to just keep going. Like sort of this willful drive, or I'm driving in a car and there's a flat tire, but I just have to keep going because I have to get there, right? It's that sense of not urgency, but willful effort. You're going to make it through. So that's just having that mental resource is so powerful, right? Because things can get really bad for you, and it just allows you to keep pushing on. So we've got that capacity going on. And now as that goes on, you've got two other things happening as well. You've got basically two angels whispering in your ears.
Yeah.
One is saying, oh boy, you are really tired. Boy, are you tired. Can you feel how fatigued your body is? You should really just sit down and take a break right now. Then you've got this other angel saying, no, keep going. It's really not that bad.
Yeah.
And so how does the body and the mind adjudicate all this? And that gets quickly into the science of fatigue. And the fatigue story has evolved a lot recently. There was, for a long time, we thought of fatigue as essentially another one of these reactive kinds of feedback where the muscles get tired, they release chemicals. Those chemicals circulate around in the blood, they influence the brain, and they tell the brain, oh, these muscles are tired, they need a break. Right? So we're gonna wait until the muscles are tired, and then we're gonna turn them off for a little while and let them recover. And actually, that's true, right? If you sprint around a track as fast as you can until you can't go any farther, that's driving what's that kind of fatigue. But if you're walking across a city, that's not what's going on. Your muscles aren't that tired. We know that. Any one of us can get up right now if we're physically healthy. We can get up, walk out the door, and easily walk 50 kilometers nonstop with no food or water. That's how powerful our bodies are at just walking. So there's something else tricking us in the sort of more modern idea about fatigue, and this is a different kind of fatigue, is that it's our brain just making a decision about its reserves and protecting itself and its body, right? You're playing it. The brain has this problem. It's got this guessing game. It's saying, well, you've got to walk across a city, and I've got to make a guess about how many resources you have to do that. And do you have enough to make it? And I'm going to kind of hold you back and hold a lot in reserve so that just in case, let's say we have to walk back and forth across the city 3 times, I'll have enough reserves to do that. If you think about, our primordial ancestors, right, who are out hunting or doing whatever they're doing in the wild, they needed to hold a lot in reserve.
Yeah.
Right? There was no city. There was no mental map of how far they were going to have to go on a given day. So I think built into this sort of design of how we make choices about walking and how much exertion will apply, the brain is very conservative, and so it'll hold a lot. It'll hold back quite a bit, and coaches have figured this out. So now, if you watch, really good, you watch the recent Olympics or any Nordic ski race, the skiers have really figured out how to push through that feeling of holding in reserve, right? So they will give it everything now. And even though there's another angel saying, give up, just take a break, they'll push through that. And it takes a lot of training to learn to ignore that input.
What do you do? What do they do to push through that?
Watch a Nordic. The phenomenon is watch a Nordic race, and right at the finish line, everybody collapses to the ground.
Yeah, true.
It's really funny, right?
Yeah.
Guaranteed. It's not because it's a fashionable thing to do.
or what you're supposed to do. Exactly, yeah.
It's not a social contagion. What it's demonstrating is sort of these two angels, the one saying push through, ignore those brain signals that are saying to stop, and the other one that's saying stop, right? They're just pushing at each other all the way through to the finish line. And as soon as they get to the finish line, they don't need to suppress that feeling of, oh, I'm tired. And so this other angel just comes in and just throws them to the ground. And they're down for about a minute, and then quickly pop up, and it's all smiles, and everybody recovers very quickly. They don't fall to the ground because their body's exhausted. Otherwise, they wouldn't get up a minute later. If their bodies were truly deprived of all energy, they'd be getting carted off to the hospital. No, this is two minds that are fighting it out over how much energy to expend during the race. During the race, they can convince themselves to keep going as hard as they can and to ignore this other voice that's just saying stop. And then they get to the end, and it flips for a minute or two, and then they're not racing anymore. It comes to a balance. So that's a really interesting thing, because it's this complicated interaction between two voices in the mind arguing over what fatigue should be. It's signals coming in from the body, and they've somehow trained themselves to sort of regulate this conversation to the point where they can really go fast and not suffer from that sense of fatigue until the very end.
Right. Yeah, so this is kind of the extreme version of you not wanting to go out for your jog, kind of.
Yes, yeah. Or you do the jog, and about halfway in, you really
exactly.
cut the pace to this very sort of this pathetic. Well, today I'm going to take it easy.
Exactly. I was actually out taking a jog before, 2 hours before we started this conversation, and I think it was 30 minutes in or something that I felt, first it all just felt great, and then 30 minutes in I felt, started to feel the feeling of now something in me wants to quit. So then
and it's not your body, and you think it's your body telling you this. It's your brain telling you that. It's your brain saying, well, I don't know how far he's going to run, so I better hold something in reserve.
It's interesting, but it really has to do with the pros and cons of keep on running. I suppose. I mean, if you have a good reason of running, let's say you're chased by I don't know, somebody who wants to hurt you, then you probably won't feel the feeling.
Oh yeah, you would definitely err on the you will exert yourself, and that's what the athletes are learning to do. They're basically simulating an environment where they can expend every last bit they've got. It's as if they're being chased, right? And the reward structure is so high for them to win, so that really helps.
Yeah, but could you if could you elaborate on that, what they actually do to to be able to push through? And
I think it's both fast and slow training, right? So it really helps. Depends what the sport is, but being able to go long and slow for many, many hours teaches you how much reserve you actually have, right? And so that's very common in Nordic training. Skiers will just go, 50 kilometer, 100 kilometer ski races, just crazy long races, They take many, 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 many hours. So you learn you have lots of reserve, just through experience. And then the other is interval training, where when you get to that point where you're feeling the fatigue, you actually practice accelerating. And
right.
Like in your jog, right? Yeah. Right when you feel like, oh boy, I'm getting tired, start to do just sprints at that point. Just interval training where you go very fast and then recover, and then very fast and recover. And you suddenly realize, oh, there's a lot more in my body that's available to me. It's just my mind's playing a trick on me.
That is fascinating. So it's not like doing interval training, for example. It's not only about the actually upgrading your biology in a way. It's also changing your mind. I mean, teaching yourself kind of that you have more to give. Absolutely.
That's what's going on when they collapse at the finish line. It's the mind just letting go. Finally, they've been controlling and convincing themselves they've got all these extra reserves, and then they let go of that feeling, and boom, down you go.
Mm-hmm. That is very interesting. I think, like here in Sweden, when people are doing their military service, I think that is like one of the typical things that probably a lot of people get out of doing it, that they learn that they have a lot more to give even when they are really, really tired.
Yeah, you have so many more reserves than you have ever experienced before. And that's just the nature of sort of how we grow up now. We're not in situations growing up as adolescents or young adults where we're really pushed to an extreme, whereas probably, our ancestors had to take long walks. Little kids had to take long walks. So everybody knew, they had many more opportunities to experience profound fatigue just in daily life than we do now.
Right. It's also, I think, fascinating talking about like why, because I'm talking about physical intelligence. So I think it's quite interesting to talk about the evolutionary reason for, or like why we have physical intelligence.
Well, we wouldn't exist if we didn't.
That's a good reason. but sorry, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about the evolutionary side of it's always a little bit hazardous to make speculations about what happened in evolution, because we weren't there. But clearly we're at the end of a long line of interesting incremental developments that just added more and more capacity for what we could do. And if you compare us to any of it, one of the pitfalls, I think, in thinking about this is to frame it in terms of what makes humans unique. I don't think that's the right way to ask about this question, because as soon as an alien shows up from another planet that's a little bit smarter than us, we're not going to be thinking about what we can do in terms of our uniqueness. We're no longer unique.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's the wrong way to frame the question. What is interesting is to ask what are some like milestone incremental improvements in design that really give us a lot. And people will talk about language, social intelligence, other aspects of the mind that make humans, have a lot of capacity and survive as a species. I kind of look at it at a more sort of primitive level. For example, if you think about tools, we can no longer say, well, humans are the only tool users. We know, the animal planet's got endless examples of other animals, using interesting tools to solve problems, mostly sticks and things like that, pokers to change the shape of their body to solve problems. So tool use per se isn't interesting, but there are different kinds of tools, and the way we use different kinds of tools tells us a lot about sort of underlying capacities that really help a lot, right? So being able to take a blunt object and just hammer with it, just take a stone and pound something with it, right? So capuchin monkeys are great at cracking open Brazil nuts. And to do that, they've got to move their body just right. But what they're also showing is they understand something about weight, that they can apply force against that nut to crack it open. Now, that just may seem totally obvious and simple to you, but that's a big deal. There aren't a lot of species that can take mass and accelerate it and use that dynamic force to do work for them. We can do it. Some of the other primate species do it. And that's about it. So somewhere along the way, we figured out some high school physics and in the mind.
Yeah.
And we can apply that in the way we move and smack rocks against things, right? It's a huge deal in terms of physical intelligence. Now, that doesn't mean a chimpanzee, for example, understands the concept of weight, like if they look at a bowling ball versus a balloon, it's not necessarily the case that they really have a concept that the bowling ball is heavy until they pick it up, and then they, through physical experience, they understand, oh yeah, this is now a heavy thing. Whereas we have this extra capacity, right? We can quickly learn that some things are heavy and some things are light. And it's not so clear that any other species can do that. So that's another, advantage in being able to work with the environment physically. It's just knowing what the weight of an object is just by looking at it. Another example of tools is, you can use a pointy object, right, to solve a problem for you, like, poke ants out of a hole for food. Birds will use sticks to poke at worms in a hole, things like that. And a big question in the literature has been whether when they hold a stick, do they think of that stick as part of their body? That their hand is now or their finger is longer, or their beak is longer, or do they really think of it as a tool that's separate from the body? And with birds, it's not so clear. With chimps, it's pretty clear that they see it as something other than their body. For example, when we poke at a fire, right, we use a stick to poke the logs in the fireplace. We don't think we're going to burn our hand. Right? The stick is going to take the heat, not our fingers.
True.
Right? So we don't have a confusion over whether that's part of our body or not. And there's some. So what does a chimpanzee do? So you can play a trick on a chimp where you can put an apple in a box and it'll reach in and grab an apple. And on another day, you can put a towel over the box. So it has to take the towel away first, and then it can reach in and grab the apple. Now you play a trick on it one day, and you put a snake, a rubber snake, in the box, and they hate rubber snakes. So they go to reach in, and there's a snake, and they panic, and they're very upset. Okay, now the next day, you have a box with a towel on it, and there's a stick. Will they remove the towel with the stick or not? If they think there's a snake in there, they're not going to remove the towel with their hand. It's too dangerous for them. So the question is, will they use the stick? It's like us poking the fire with the stick. Will they poke the towel with the stick? If they think that the stick's part of their body, they're not going to do that. And lo and behold, they lift the towel off with the stick. So they too have got this remarkable capacity now to tell the difference between what is themselves and what is an object they're using to solve a problem. That's a very, very basic concept and capacity that you have to have to use tools. And they've got it. So do we.
Interesting. But are we as our species, are we better at using tools in general than other chimpanzees and other species?
Oh, absolutely, right. Yeah, you can find subtle, small examples of how other species use tools, but we win out. And the other thing we can do is we can take an object and think of many, many different ways of using that object.
True. Yeah.
So there's something about, and a lot of those uses are hidden, right? Right. If I have a rock, I can think about pounding with it, or I can also think about flaking it and making a sharp edge. Now I've got a tool I can use for scraping and breaking bone and things like this. But then, and if you think about human evolution, hominin evolution, it's interesting. We went from a period of no tools to very simple tools where there's just an edge of a stone would be broken off, and there'd be a sharp edge, and you could use that sharp edge to concentrate force even further. And that gets you a lot of opportunities for scraping and pounding and cracking things. But then 800,000 years go by before anything new happens.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that is a long time.
And then suddenly the hominids figured out how to shape different kinds of rocks in a variety of ways. So now you've got needle-shaped stones and flat blades and arrowhead tips, and it explodes into this whole range of shapes. So something happened where it was sort of the imagination for seeing different kinds of blades exploded, and what it is in the brain that allowed that to happen, we still don't know. But that's a huge leap forward, and there's no other species, I think, that can sort of have that kind of ability to see opportunity in a what's otherwise an inert object, right? It's just this piece of stone that you're now going to turn into something.
Right, and I also find it quite fascinating that, like, in evolutionary terms, we have mostly used stones, as I understand, but still, like, today we are able to. I mean, we can use an Xbox control, or we can use a car, or we can use a computer. We can use all these different tools and items and things that evolution, like evolutionary, that we have really have not had at all, that we can use these skills to all of these things without them existing before. I think that is also quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it's it's not clear to me. A good question would be, how much, if you think of all the neat gadgets we have now, how many of those actually does require cultural transmission to know how to use?
Yeah.
In other words, you have to teach your kids how to use it versus you can just pick it up and figure out how to, most things you can pick up and just figure out how to use. And in other words, you could take someone from 1600 AD, right?
Yeah.
They could figure out an Xbox in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's just not going to be that hard for them. In other words, our mind hasn't really changed all that much. And our physical intelligence for interacting with tools and objects really hasn't evolved all that much in the last 1,000 years. It's just our ability to sort of shape materials has improved dramatically.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how like when we're talking to somebody who knows a lot about this, it's just fascinating to get a glance of things that we take for granted. I mean, just lifting and knowing the weight of a stone, or all these things that we take for granted. It's just interesting how advanced the human brain and mind is to be able to handle like all these kinds of stuff.
If you have small children, you can do experiments with them and see the emergence of this knowledge as they develop. There's some great studies out of Canada where they took kids and they gave them nuts and stones of different weights and shapes and sizes, and they said, just crack these nuts for me. And it's really funny. The really young kids have no concept of weight or how to apply force. The idea that by swinging and hammering, you can gain advantage. They'll just throw the nuts against the wall.
Yeah.
And then they eventually learn the idea of pounding.
Yeah.
And then they learn to use the right size nuts or stones to do the pounding. And then they figure out how to use an anvil, right? So that the nuts on top of a hard object, is you place it on top of a hard object and you hit it with another hard object, you can apply even more force. So you just see this physical intelligence related to force application emerging, in a 4-year-old child and it's done through direct experience. You can't tell them anything. They've got to do it to really acquire the knowledge.
But would you say that like a lot of this also is innate? So are there also studies of this where they've got no instructions at all and they just figure this stuff out?
Yeah, I'm convinced that most physical intelligence only works because you're engaged in the physical environment. You have to experiment with your body to really understand how all this works. The best example I know of this is work by Karen Adolphs, where she asks, do children innately understand surfaces and cliffs and edges and things like this? There's a long history of people trying to decide whether babies will crawl off cliffs or not. And she did more elegant studies where she'll take toddlers, children who are just walking, and you put them at the top of a ramp, and it could be carpeted or slippery, and the parents are down at the bottom of the ramp, and you have a bunch of research assistants ready to catch the toddler, and she just asks, are they smart enough to slide down this, or will they try to walk down the slide? And toddlers will try to walk down it. They have no innate sense of how dangerous a slope is. And it's only through physical experience that you learn what you can and can't do.
Interesting.
And so it's amazing. They're fun videos to watch from her laboratory because there's a lot of catching going on, and they're absolute maniacs.
Do you know what to search for on YouTube if you want to find it? If there's something on there?
Adolphs, Adolphs. I can't remember the name of her lab, but you can find it. And then the toddlers learn. They're very quick learners, so they'll learn if it is something steep. They learn to slide on their belly, and then if it's really steep, they learn, oh, I better not slide head first. I better slide feet first. So they learn all that by doing. So they're really, and her emphasis has always been, they're really good experimenters, right? And that's what I think is innate. It's not the walking or the sliding. It's this innate capacity to explore different actions for the given problem.
Right.
And they, through experimentation, they learn which kind of movement, sliding, walking, what have you, crawling, is going to work best in a given environment.
One question which I am curious about is, like, how adaptable are we, or like how adaptable are we when it comes to physical intelligence?
Well, we're always adapting, and I think that's something people don't recognize, is that there's this phrase in America, rust never sleeps. The rust that eats metal never goes to sleep, right? And it's kind of like your ability to forget how to do things well is always declining. Now, you can always remember how to use a bicycle, but to learn how to remember how to ride a bicycle really well, really smoothly, that takes a little bit of practice. You're always forgetting a little bit of that. Walking, it's not like you learn to walk and you're done. You're actually, every day of your life, you're tinkering with and making small adjustments to how you walk. Eye movements, the amount of gain there is to whip the eyeballs around. You're always tinkering. As the skull gets bigger and the muscles change size, you have to constantly be adjusting the amount of output you put to the eye muscles. So we're always adjusting, and people forget that. And so if you think about what's the single most dangerous tool in the workplace, it's the 6-foot ladder. Mm-hmm. Because people forget how to climb things, and they don't remember what it takes to be really good at balancing high up off the ground, and they fall off ladders all the time. Another example is walking on ice. Every winter, the ice comes back, and we walk out on the ice thinking, "Oh yeah, I can do this." And the number of people that fall and break bones on ice is astronomical.
Yeah.
I don't know. That might not be true in Sweden, where it's icy all the time. But
no. It happens here for sure.
But you notice, right, after a few weeks, you regain that skill of shuffling. Just the right amount of shuffle.
The ice dance.
The ice dance. You relearn the ice dance every year, and then you forget it again. That's a beautiful example of this forgetting problem.
Yeah.
So all physical action requires a lot of rehearsing that we forget about, but it's really important.
I think it's pretty cool. A couple of weeks ago, we had ice here, or not even a couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, and I was walking and I slipped. And I think it's also quite fascinating how it just happens automatically, and then afterwards you become aware of your actions that you did to not fall.
Yeah. And then you tell everyone, well, I meant to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You were in conscious control.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge part of physical intelligence, is reacting extremely quickly. And that was a huge engineering problem for evolution to crack and to figure out, was how do you go fast enough, given that the nervous system by and large is pretty slow. By the time you sense that you're slipping, and it goes up into your brain, and you consciously evaluate that slip, and now you calculate what adjustments you need to make to react to it, and what should you do with your muscles to adjust for it. All that takes time, and you have to figure out some tricks to speed up to get around all those delays, so that you don't fall down. Or if you're trying to throw a spear at a fish and the fish is moving, how you adjust your throw on the fly so you can do it quick enough, you can get that fish. Or if you're sword fighting, or if you're whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
They're playing tennis so that you can adapt to someone's spin on the ball that's coming at you. All those things require a solution that it's a very clever, fairly technical solution for how the brain can get around the delays in the system.
But how does it do that? Because I know, like, reflexes, if we put our hands on a stove, then it's like really automatic. Is it like how does the body and the brain solve these automatic movements when slipping on ice, for example?
Well, yeah, the hot stove is relatively easy to explain, because you don't need a brain for that. It's just the heat goes in to the fingers. There's sensors there. It goes up the nerves to the spinal cord, which connect directly to the nerves that go right back to the muscles of the arm.
Yeah.
And so it's two nerves, boom, and so that's going to be it's as quick as it can get. For more fluid movements, playing tennis and adjusting your swing, things like that, what you have to do is you have to be tracking what your brain is telling your muscles to do on the fly. So my brain is saying, swing the tennis racket such and such a way. And so it's watching itself. It's watching that command going out to the muscles. And now let's say vision sees the tennis ball has a little bit of coming at you, has a little bit of spin on it. It's got to adjust that command, and it's not going to wait and it's not going to ask, what's the position of my arm? It's not going to wait and try to sense arm position through the sensors in the arm. It's going to say, well, my muscle command says I ought to be here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume it's here, and so so I'm not waiting for any feedback from the body. I'm just looking at what the command itself is guessing the body is doing. And it's called, so that buys you 70 to 120 milliseconds. Buys you a lot, which is a lot if you're trying to do something fast. Now, falling on ice or not, the ice dance is kind of in between, because you've got both things going on there. You've got spinal reflexes, brainstem reflexes, and then also these motor command tricks as well to try to adjust. So the ice dance was pretty complicated.
One
example of all the systems together.
One of the most advanced thing for evolution to fix, for sure. Yeah. But it's just fascinating how much and how many parts of the brain that has to work together to be able to just correct some, so that we don't fall from the ice.
Yeah, another way to think about this motor command trick would be, you send your best friend off on the train to go to a far city. When they're going to be at intermediate stations by the train schedule. You don't have to wait for the train to arrive and say, oh, now we're in this city. Oh, now we're in this city. You already have a schedule.
Yeah.
It tells you where the train's going to be at each moment. And the brain is doing the same thing. It has a schedule about, if I send these commands down to the muscles,
right,
I have a pretty good guess about where it's going to be it doesn't have to tell me it got to each station. I already know. So that's great because now I can anticipate what it's going to be doing ahead of time.
It's just insane that it works. I mean, I just think it's really fascinating. I've been playing both squash and tennis, and I just think it's so interesting when like that you can see a ball or you can sense a ball coming, and that your body just knows how to hit that ball so that you will you'll be more likely to win. I just find it really, really fascinating, especially when it's those really high demands from your body and your brain.
Yeah, I agree. It's we think we understand some of what's going on, but there's still a lot of magic to it because it is working at such a high computational speed.
Yeah, I also think it's quite interesting about just thinking about different environments that we have been living in. So, for example, somebody living like an Eskimo living in Greenland when there's a lot of snow and a lot of ice must have had or one physical intelligence compared to somebody who is like a hunter on Sahara or somebody who is living in a jungle. That we probably also are quite good at adapting to our environments.
Right, and that's true, and it raises an interesting question for when you're trying to talk about sort of universal physical intelligence. It's not the physical intelligence of Greenland or the physical intelligence of Africa. It's like, what are the underlying capacities that allow that adaptation everywhere? And to me, I started with just walking. We are walkers, right? I mean, humans just have an unbelievable capacity to travel on foot that most of us have forgotten about. But that's, you start with that. That gets you a lot. It allows you to just get to all these different environments readily. And then basically fabricating tools and fabricating clothing, those get you a long way, and shelter. Those are big pieces as well. But I think that the efficient walking is one of the most important pieces we've got. I think when I was 14, I was 14 years old, I decided to walk to the beach one day. The beach was 28 miles, which that's 35 kilometers away. I just walked out the door and walked to the beach. It was no big deal, right? Hitchhiked home.
Yeah.
It was a nice walk.
Yeah.
We can all do that, and we take that absolutely for granted. It poses a problem in terms of fitness because we are so efficient at walking. It's not a particularly good way to lose weight. We wish it was, but it's not. It's great. I mean, there's a big movement right now, at least in the U.S. 10,000 steps programs, and where you wear a tracker and you count your steps every day and compare them to your friends, and that's become sort of a metric of fitness. And it's clearly better than nothing. But in terms of actually burning calories or losing weight, it's just barely getting you started, right? I mean, because we're just the biomechanics of bipedal ambulation are so fantastic that you got to either have a backpack on or be walking up hills or stairs to really start burning, or run to burn.
How are we? How efficient are we when it comes to calorie consumption compared to other monkeys or apes that are bipedal?
Oh,
or they're not bipedal, but yeah, compared to other monkeys and apes.
Yeah, they're. Yeah, so the other, if you look at chimps, the key is in the hip swing. They've got a really inefficient hip swing, so they kind of waddle. They kind of just think of a child in diapers.
Yeah,
in the way they walk, right? That costs a lot in efficiency, whereas we carry the leg through and underneath the hip. And so that buys you an enormous amount. If you take I figured out, what does it cost to walk a mile? And no one really understands calories very well. So I just did it in Snickers bars.
Right.
And basically one bite of a Snickers bar will get you a mile.
Wow. Yeah,
Right?
that's quite a lot.
Yeah. So that's pretty, yeah. And then, but you can really see how sensitive we are to the biomechanics if you disrupt their biomechanics at all. So if you have a sprained ankle or a sore knee, so you have any kind of limp in your gait, you're going to increase, or you're going to lose about 10%, 15% of your walking efficiency.
Yeah.
Very quickly. So actually, if you want to lose weight, you want to walk with a limp.
So you first have to get injured to lose weight.
Yeah, well, I'm not recommending that.
No,
yeah.
No, of course, of course not. Yeah, of course. From writing your book, like what has been the most important thing that you learned?
I think the most important thing is figuring out, like, what's the puzzle that you still are curious about, that you want to think about more in the future. You know, how does this book push me into I'm going to think in the future?
Yeah.
And I've become obsessed with this distinction between exercise and physical activity. None of our ancestors, 500 years ago, nobody 300 years ago was exercising, right? So we had 70,000 years of existence where no one ever exercised.
Yeah.
We did pretty well as a species. And so you have to ask, like, is exercise really the thing we need right now? Is it really replacing whatever we're missing in terms of physical health? And as a question, I don't know the answer. The alternative is this idea of physical activity. And what distinguishes them is not the amount of calories you burn, but the complexity of action itself. It's the difference between walking or jogging on a treadmill and jogging in a nature park, where the trails, let's say, been flooded and there's some trees down and there might be a bear in the woods. Right?
Right.
Those are fundamentally different environments. And there's emerging evidence that the health benefits of physical activity in these more complex environments is really what is good for us. It's good for our brain in terms of ongoing health, mood, and then also healthy aging.
What? Just so that I understand what you mean. Could you explain the differences between the two?
If when you're in natural environments and doing physical activities, there's a lot more unpredictability. Right, the surfaces vary constantly. Each step requires a different kind of motor plan than, say, compared to jogging on a treadmill.
Yeah.
The route finding, right? You have to navigate. You have to decide, each turn of the trail, you have to decide where you're going to go. You have to maintain knowledge of where you are so you can find your way back to your car. So there's a lot of complexity there. So you're exercising your mind and your brain all together and body all together. So the idea is that when you just exercise, your muscles release chemicals like BDNF, and there's evidence from mice and a little bit of human data that BDNF helps neurons in the brain make connections. But on the other hand, your brain likes to make connections when it's challenged. when it's solving problems, when it's navigating, when it's thinking. And so the treadmill doesn't give you any of that. The treadmill just gives you the BDNF, but no brain requirements. Whereas if you do the same amount of running in the woods, now your brain is also doing the navigating, and it's dealing with how it's going to make each step along the trail. It's doing all kinds of things. So the BDNF is going to have a much better kick in maintaining brain health.
Right. So it's kind of, I've been doing some kite surfing on and off, where like that's quite complicated and it takes some time to learn. And then so that is really both like the physical part and the like the mental part as well.
Right. And so the whole distinction between physical activity and exercise is right there. You're problem solving and learning as you're doing something physical. And I think that's where you get the most health benefit for sort of mind body. That's where you're going to see the best outcomes for people with mood disorders. You're going to see the healthiest aging. Now, as you age and your body has less capacity physically, you've got to adapt, right, and do appropriate activities. I'm not recommending that 80-year-olds go out kite surfing.
No, New rule: all 8-year-olds know how to do kite surfing. No brisk walking anymore.
Yeah, brisk walking is huge, right? And in the U.S. right now, actually in Europe as well, there's a huge research interest in the relationship between where you live, your age, how well you're aging, and your activities. And so there's some emerging evidence that if you're really old and you're in a nursing home, you're actually going to do better if that nursing home is next to a nature park.
Yeah, I've heard about that before.
It's the data, right? And
it's pretty. I've interviewed Mats Hallgren. He's a researcher who has been researching like exercise and mental health. And when we was talking also, he also mentioned that when physical inactivity, that if you're more active when you're not physically active, so like your brain is more active but you're sitting still, that is also, if I remember correctly, something that was linked to better mental health, if I remember correctly. I think that is what he said. Right.
It's tricky though, because I'm not criticizing what he's saying. I want to add a nuance to it, which I'm sure he would agree with, which is healthy people have all these things. Healthy people there's actually a scale that's emerged in the last couple of years called the Busyness Scale. I love this scale. So it's a questionnaire, and it's asking, how busy are you? Are you a busy person or not?
Right.
And busy people tend to live longer and are healthier, but they're busy physically, they're busy mentally, verbally, they're just busy, right? There's just, so that's a really positive attribute for a lot of reasons that you can benefit from it.
Right. So that research is saying that being more busy is better.
It's great. Yeah. And I would agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So these are important ideas because we're becoming, we're creating ultra large urban centers with less and less nature, and all our sidewalks are smooth, all our surfaces are clean. There's no physical challenge in much of the modern world other than getting hit by Ubers.
Yeah.
And so how do you maintain sort of this physically rich existence in what's becoming an increasingly virtual kind of existence? And I don't know. Is it going to be clever VR or augmented reality kinds of strategies? Is it going to be gymnasiums that have challenge? Like climbing gyms are a good example of ways you can take exercise and make it more challenging.
Yeah.
Clearly, dancing in the elderly is a huge, hugely interesting intervention that's looking to be pretty good, right? As you age, if you're learning how to dance and you've not done this before, there are a lot of gains from doing that. There's a lot of benefit.
Yeah. I was also interested to know, like, what do you think, like, is the most important point in your book or with your book? If you could only name one.
Oh, it's like physical intelligence is experiential. All the thinking in the world is not going to make you smarter physically. You have to go out and do it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. To be able to become physically more intelligent, we have to be physically engaged.
Exactly. And most of us are not engaged enough, I would say.
Yeah. This is also another thing that just came to mind. When you're visualizing doing something physical, as from my understanding, that is also activating the same parts of the brain as actually doing it. But or how does that work? Is that the case, or?
In the 1980s, we balkanized the brain. There were visual areas and there were motor areas, and they were segregated. Visual areas are in the back of the head, and the motor areas are the middle part of the head. The thinking areas are in the front of the head. That's kind of how everybody thought about how the brain was organized. And all the research funding went to people who were working on the back of the head, the middle of the head, or the front of the head, and they didn't talk to each other. So that created a real bias that's still kind of around there, right? There's a seeing brain and a doing brain, but if you actually just try to build a robot that's going to go out in the world and do things, you realize these kind of areas have to really talk to each other quite a bit. They have to be really integrated. And so what you see in the 90s is a shift in how we think about the relationship between particularly vision and action. And one of the big observations was that a lot of areas that we thought were just there to make you move are also highly responsive when you're watching other people move. So that's neat, right? So they're doing something more abstract. These are brain areas that we thought were just planning movement, but what they're really doing is representing action. And it could be the action that I'm executing, or it could be the action that you're executing. A good example is you watch someone in basketball make a free throw shot, make a shot, and you're trying to guess whether the ball is going to go in the hoop. If you're a basketball player and you have a lot of experience making those movements and creating those kinds of actions, you're going to be better at predicting whether someone else's shot is going to go into the hoop. And these brain areas are really doing that work. They're figuring out, because they have knowledge about predicting what you can do, they can also predict what other people are going to do when they make the actions. So that's a really neat kind of shift in how we think about the relationship between what you see and what you do. Now, visualizing is a sort of a more complicated variation of that, when you're sort of asking, okay, if I just close my eyes and mentally rehearse an action, can I also really kind of go through the motions, so to speak, without moving? And that literature is more controversial. For certain kinds of actions, it clearly helps. So if it's anything sequential, like a series of dance moves or a series of gymnastics moves, rehearsing that sequence of actions in your mind really helps as a rehearsal step, right? You'll get better at that gymnastic, that total gymnastic performance. However, for something like, let's say, thrusting your foil out if you're a fencer, or swinging a golf club, all the mental rehearsal in the world doesn't seem to help the actual swing all that much. So there's a distinction, right? So if you're really down at the level of, particular muscles and shaping, just really detailed aspects of movement, it's really hard for mental rehearsal to do all that much, for visualizing to do that all that much. It's much better either at sort of the sequencing of actions, stringing things together like the gymnast, or in visualizing the goal. Like if you're playing golf, visualizing, okay, I want the ball to go to such and such a spot. I'm going to really visualize ball leaving around, flying across through the air and landing in such and such a spot. That actually will really influence the swing you use, and the ball will be more likely to go where you want it to. Now, you notice you're not thinking about how you're going to swing the club. You're thinking about where you want the ball to go, right? So and what you're doing is you're visualizing the goals and the outcomes, and you're making predictions about what's going to happen. Visualizing is really good for that, but it's not so good at like, okay, I can imagine my muscles doing such and such a thing. That there you've got to just practice moving your muscles and get them trained up.
So that's fascinating. So when it comes to the really detailed stuff, then it's not as good. But when it comes to the sequencing of movements for dance example, then it seems to work. The sequencing and the outcomes. It's. I want my tennis ball to go there. I'm not going to think about, I want my racket to hit. If you think, I want my racket all in such and such a way, it's not going to do much. Exactly.
But if it's, I want the ball, I'm going to visualize the ball going to that corner, then it's really going to help you.
Isn't that like a good way to win over an opponent, that you tell them to think about their like golf swing when they do it, and then that is
it's
like,
classic.
that
it's a classic trick. Yeah.
Can you teach me exactly how you? Go ahead.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, that's a really nasty technique. The other thing that can really mess. Also, just watching someone who's really bad.
Really? Really?
Because of this idea that when you're watching someone else's actions, you're also representing them in your motor system. It's like you're pouring really bad influences into your motor areas just by observing, right?
Interesting.
As a really bad golfer, I can ruin a lot of other people's games. So.
You just go out there, but with the goal of just getting the other people's level down, kind of.
That's right.
Yeah, I have a friend who has been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a very long time, and he looks at these videos of people who are really, really good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then perhaps that has the opposite effect, that stimulates his brain in a positive way.
Oh, absolutely, no question. Yeah, that's a really good thing to do. There, some people call it modeling, right? We are good at physical imitation. That's built into physical intelligence, right? This ability to just look at how someone else is moving their body and emulating that ourselves. So you want to have the best models you can find.
Right, Scott. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. Is there something else that you would like to mention before we hang up?
I just hope the listeners get inspired to go out and do crazy things with their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy in quotes.
Yeah.
That constantly challenge yourself.
Yeah.
It's one of the best things you can do for yourself.
For sure. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, your book is called Physical Intelligence, The Science of Thinking Without Thinking. And really, really big thank you for coming on. I think it's been a fascinating discussion, and I've personally learned a lot. So big thank you for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been fun.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Friends, I really need your help. I'm trying to get the podcast out there. So I was wondering if you could help me by leaving a positive rating and a review on your Apple device or the podcast player that you're using, as well as subscribing to the podcast. That really helps getting the show more visible on iTunes and other players. And if you don't know how it's done, then YouTube has a lot of great videos, so you can search there. All right, that's it. Take care.